You're listening to the Favorite Marriage Podcast, a place where you and your spouse can experience God's favor on your forever. Join us as we explore relevant topics and provide practical tools for your marriage toolbox. Here's this week's episode of The Favorite Marriage.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Favorite Marriage Podcast. We are your hosts, Monty and Jeannine Mora, and this is a podcast you want to listen to if you are interested in taking your marriage to another level, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, in this episode, we are going to be talking about how to navigate the death of a spouse. And we are dedicating this episode to some very dear friends and family members that we know that have walked down this very, very difficult journey. But it's part of a series that we've been doing about when your marriage vows are tested. And so obviously we are in the segment where we talk about till death do us part.
Yeah, this has been a really, really good mini series, and I think
Mhm.
it's really helping a lot of people because I think every married couple can really relate to the series about when your vows get tested, when your
Yeah.
vows go through those trials and tribulations. And so, as we tackle this subject today on Until Death Do We Part, we're going to be talking about marriage, about it being a lifetime commitment, a commitment to one another. And sometimes that commitment takes it all the way to the point of
Yeah.
death. And Jeannie and I want to read a quote here, but I think it's worth sharing this quote as we dive into the topic. But
Mhm.
I heard somebody share, I think it was just today, where they said marriage is a lifetime business, and it really is. And I would like to add to that. Not only is it a lifetime business, but it's a business of it's a spiritual business that you invest in. It's a emotional business. It's a physical business. All of
Mhm.
these are like transactions that
Yeah.
we do inside of our marriage. But more importantly than anything else, marriage is a serious business to God. So when we make a commitment to the Lord in covenant at that on our wedding day, man, it's a serious task, isn't it?
Mhm. I love that quote because just like any business, for any business owners out there, you know that there was a risk, right? There was that first initial vision, and then there was the risk of taking that leap of faith,
Mhm.
kind of like when you're at the altar and you take that leap of faith. Then there's the investment, right? And a lot of times in that investment there's sacrifice,
Yeah.
and when there's that investment and there's the hard work that's put into a business, you begin to get a return. And that's what marriage is all about, right? We invest in one another, but we also receive a lot of benefits with that as well.
We've always said that marriage is like a bank account. You know, you're
Hmm.
making
Yep.
deposits and withdrawals, and hopefully over that lifetime of marriage that you have together as a spouse,
Hmm.
the goal is to make more deposits
For sure. Yeah.
than withdrawals. And somebody once says that when you make more withdrawals than deposit, then you begin to lose interest.
Oh, that's good.
hmm
I thought you were gonna say you go bankrupt.
Can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
A marriage
I mean,
bankruptcy.
you lose interest and then you go bankrupt. That's kind of how it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, marriage is definitely not for the weak at heart. It is a true commitment, and there's a heavy weight of responsibility when we speak those wedding vows
For
to
sure.
one another. Um, and one of those wedding vows that we speak is "Until death do we part," and that's a heavy task that couples have to navigate through, isn't it?
It is. And when you find yourself in that place where you are heading towards that, where there might be a season of sickness and you begin a journey down that path, I mean, that is a very difficult
hmm
place to be. And we've seen our friends and some family members who have had a journey towards that end of life. And
hmm
I mean, just watching them, it's a difficult road, but then there's also those who have lost a loved one, their spouse, suddenly,
Sure.
and they didn't see it coming.
Right.
And either way, there's great, great loss, and there's a journey to be traveled after.
Yeah. We can talk about a lot of different family members, friends, and people that we've known, even friends in the pastorate ministry who have
Hmm.
lost a spouse. And but more recently, the more um, I guess the one that's more sentimental right now in our hearts is our dear friends John and Linda White.
Yes.
Pastor John, he was a dear friend of ours. great man of God. His wife Linda, great woman of God, and we want to share a little bit about their story simply because Pastor John just passed away on September 20th of
Yeah.
this year, 2024, as you're
Very
hearing this
sad.
episode. And I had the amazing opportunity to preach his not his funeral, we would say his welcome home party, right?
Mm,
Welcome home, John. And so that's so fresh upon our hearts, and our hearts still ache and grieve for his loss, but also for his wife Linda. But they have a pretty interesting story of how we entered their journey when we met them a few years ago. So
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about their story,
Hmm.
and then we want like to give some practical tools. Again, we always want to put marriage tools in the toolbox on how a spouse can navigate this difficult road with the death of a
Yeah.
spouse.
Well, I would like to start off by saying just the impact this couple had. They went to school together. I think they were high school sweethearts, and then life happened, and their paths went different ways. And then somehow, again, they met up again at a was it their 50th high school reunion?
Yeah, 50th.
Wow. But, their paths crossed again, and they, eventually got married,
Hmm.
and at the altar, they asked God for a good 10 years. I mean, because they were, what, like 70? John was
John was
70
70. Yeah.
when they remarried, and, um, they knew they didn't have a lot of time, and so they
Hmm.
asked God for 10 years, and would you
Hmm.
believe that God blessed them with 10 great years. And in those 10 years, this couple, you would say they are a power couple. When
Yeah.
you talk about power couples, um, they allow God to use them even in their later years of life to just impact
Mm.
people, just individuals. I know John touched many young men and young men, and Linda sat with women, young women, but they also had a heart for marriages,
Yeah.
which actually is what brought us in close relationship with them is
Hmm.
our passion for marriage and their passion for marriage. So,
Yeah.
yeah, they're such a blessing.
Such an amazing couple. For I think for one of our marriage courses, they wrote um, like discussion questions. They wrote all their homework assignments for
Mhm.
one of our classes, and they would
Yeah.
send it to us and say, here's the week one,
Yeah.
here's week two.
They're like the
Yeah,
ghostwriters.
the ghostwriters, yeah, holy ghostwriters.
That's for sure.
Yeah, amazing, amazing couple. And
Mhm.
John, this last summer, he got really, really ill, and
Mhm.
at the age of 80, his body just couldn't take it anymore. And I'm telling you, working in hospice care because we were able to bring on John to hospice care at the company that I work for, and it was tough to bring on a dear friend that you love greatly into hospice care, knowing like what the final journey, the final lap is going to look like.
Mm.
But I tell you what, Linda, she was a true champ. She
Mhm.
really stood by John, and she really embodied what it means for a spouse to stick by their spouse until the final second, the final breath that John took. Linda was right there holding his hand, and that's what she wanted. She goes, I
Yeah.
want to hold
Yeah.
John's hand in his final breath, and she did it.
Yeah.
And powerful, powerful. But I think more important than that, Janine, is the journey of watching them go through this path together in hospice care, and just watching them love each other,
Mhm.
watching them cry together, watching them pray together, and just really sticking together as a
Yes.
husband and wife. Man, it was so heartwarming and so impactful. What a great story.
Right. And we've witnessed this in life a handful of times where, family members who love deeply, I think
Mhm.
of your sister and our brother-in-law and just the impact that they had in our lives at a young
True.
age.
Yeah.
And the love they had till the end. I think
Mhm.
of my grandmother, who stood by my grandfather's side, uh, just the many, many years, 50 plus years. I think might have been around 60 by the time he passed.
Mm.
And then just some friends of ours, so
Yeah.
that in the pastorate where he just lost his wife in the middle of pastoring, right? And then these people are just the very essence of what the vows, right? Those
Yeah.
vows till death do us part truly mean. And so
Mhm.
these moments are harder to watch, but they also are the heart of God.
Mhm.
Like just staying till the end, resiliency and just
Mm.
pouring into one another. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Watching them journey that road, all of these individuals and people that we know, we've seen so many different the aftermath of
Mhm.
how okay, now how once my spouse has passed,
What's
what do
next?
I do?
Yep.
What's next for me? And so what we want to talk a little bit about regarding this John and Linda story and all of these individuals and those of you who maybe navigated this, you're going to find a lot of resemblance with what we're going to say today. But when someone you know loses a spouse and
Mhm.
that person whom you shared your hopes with, your dreams with, your concerns, your time, they're now gone. What do you do? And one of the things that we hear couples say, Janine, is how their daily routine is so disrupted
Yeah, for
now,
sure.
right? It is so impacted. Like the things that they used to do together and now that they're gone, they're not able to do that again. And so there's this daily routine that they have experienced together. Things just like household chores,
Paying the bills.
paying the bills,
Oh, Linda, when we went there, I remember her talking to you about winterizing her yard,
yeah,
things that John did for
yeah,
her.
cooking meals together.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a team.
Going to church together.
Yeah, it's a friendship. It's a path of friendship that you get to
Mhm.
journey together, and all of a sudden, um, that one is gone. The one that used to say goodnight to all those years is now gone. The routine of life is just totally disrupted.
Right. How do you get past that?
Mm,
We've seen it again, different journeys, different ways that people have handled those moments. And there's some really, really good things to do. And then there's other ways where we've seen where that person maybe didn't do things so well. And
mhm,
we've seen just like more heartbreak, right? And then
mhm,
just spiraling. So, how do you do that well?
mhm, yeah.
You being in hospice, Monty, you've witnessed so many of these stories. Maybe not as close as the one that we're talking about, but you've been asked this question
Mhm.
a lot.
Well, we'll talk more about it here in a bit, but like the grief, we call it anticipatory grief, and
There
it's
you go. That's
giving giving the couple the freedom to grieve before the actual death event happens, and we call
mm,
it pre-grief or early grief. And many couples will go through that. And like John and Linda, many times they would say to us that she said just the other day we sat in front of each other and we just cried together, for what will be.
mhm,
And that's that early pre-grief moment. But then that grief journey happens, or that grief journey continues after the actual death event happens. There's just a
mhm,
whole nother wave of grief that takes place. And specifically, like when a married couple, we talked earlier about how not only is their daily life impacted, but even after that, their identity as a married partner is now unraveled. So the
mhm,
surviving spouse is there, and they're trying to figure out, what is my new identity here. And then of course we want to come alongside those couples and help them identify what the new purpose in life will look like and what that new journey will look like. Because man, knowing that your spouse is gone and you guys had an identity together, it's like
a
us,
new
like we're known
identity,
as Monty and
and
Janine,
yeah,
John and
mhm,
Linda. And so now John is in heaven now, and Linda's trying to figure out, who am I in this?
mhm,
And it's the whole identity that's just being unraveled from the top all the way down. And now
mhm,
you're alone and you feel like you're like incomplete, you know?
yeah. There's a lot of conversation. Again, we're talking about a scenario where you knew your spouse was heading towards death because they had that time. but there's a lot of good conversation that could happen beforehand. I think, again, of your sister and all the great conversations they had about what he would want your sister to do,
Mhm.
and continue in her her dream to become a doctor, which she is now.
Yeah.
But just all the beautiful moments that they created before, and they also included family,
Mhm.
all the different activities. Those are precious things that you can do prior to. And so when that spouse passes, you're left with some, I guess, goals, things that you wanna check
Mhm.
off the list that you all talked about
Mhm.
before the passing of your spouse,
Yeah.
and moving towards that, that gives you motivation,
Yeah.
right? There's that motivation to continue to live life because your spouse
Mhm.
would want that for you, right?
Sure.
Especially, if you lost a spouse when you're young.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
just living life and continuing to move forward in that moment is so important, right?
Yeah.
That, like you were saying, with that identity, switching that identity, gosh, that's got to be so difficult.
Mhm.
But if you hold on to just the dreams you had together,
Yeah.
and you feel like you're carrying those on
Mhm.
for each other, and you accomplish those got to be
Yeah.
very rewarding moments.
Well, those goals and dreams that a couple has before their passing, they feed into the new identity. In
Hmm.
small, tiny steps. I obviously those
Sure.
won't replace
No.
the spouse, but man, to be able to say we talked about this,
Hmm.
and like my sister, we talked about me continuing my education and becoming a doctor, and to see that she's there now. I mean,
Hmm.
that is a pretty awesome thing, and that definitely does feed into her identity, her new identity now,
Yeah.
in this life, and so
And
yeah,
then walking into that new identity, I also think of our pastor friend who also went through this, the finding love again.
yeah,
That is another step in a journey that takes its own probably whirlwind of
yeah,
emotions and doubts and
mm,
struggles and just like
mhm,
you said, just its own journey in itself. But how beautiful we've seen our pastor friend find love again and pastoring again
yeah,
with his new wife, and your sister remarrying a very wonderful man, and just bringing Julio into the family, and now Missy's a Jaramillo, and just the beauty we see in them now, just
yeah,
the love that was brought back into her
yeah,
life. So thinking about those
mm,
journeys, there is a lot in them, and we cannot speak to them personally
yeah,
because we've not traveled them. We've only been able to watch.
mhm,
But God in the center of them,
mhm,
God leading them, God always being the one you go to talk
mhm,
to, because there's all these other voices behind you saying,
yeah,
"No, you shouldn't. Yes, you should. This is not a good idea. Maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that."
yeah,
All of these voices.
mhm,
I'm sure even, Linda's probably hearing a lot. We know that
mhm,
she's moving towards her next steps in life.
mhm,
As long as you center your life to hear God's voice, first and foremost, because He loves you more
mhm,
than anybody on this earth, and He is close to the brokenhearted. I mean, He desires you to continue living on purpose for Him. Listening and hearing for His voice first has got to
mhm,
be number one.
mhm, yeah. Definitely. Man, that's some really good stuff there. I remember a conversation I had with Linda, and she was telling me that how her social life has been impacted as well.
Hmm.
She would say John and her used to have this routine of going to church and things like that,
Yeah.
but just having their social life disrupted. Sometimes people, your friends and family member, they might not know what to say to you at that point, and
Yeah, for
you
sure.
you can't feel like you can't feel like, or you can't perceive that as they don't want to be around you, because some people just don't know what to say when they're
Mhm.
around you. And so some people will deliberately not make the phone call or not make the visit simply because they're uncomfortable with with talking about it,
Yeah.
and so you talk about like your friendships that you have in church or your friendships you have just in your social life, that now changes because
Mhm.
people they're just leery. They're leery of how to navigate that. But
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
say, Janine, that if you're hearing this episode and if you have a dear friend that has lost a spouse, by all means, call them, love on them, take them a
Mhm.
meal. And here's the thing, you don't have to say anything when
That's
you're
right.
with them.
Yeah.
Just be with them. Shed a tear with them, eat a meal together, and just watch a movie together. Just let them know what we call ministry of presence. Just let them know I am here for you.
Mhm.
Just like Job's three friends did with him. They sat in the ashes with him for the
Mhm.
first 7 days. They didn't say one word. They just sat with Job. And that's what friends can do. That's what family members can do for that loved one. Just be there for them and let them know you're not alone.
Yeah. And not worrying about what to say. I think sometimes it's better not to say, like you said, not to say anything, because sometimes when we say things, we think we know what to say. I mean, because you might want to say something like, "Oh, well, they're in a better place," or
Yeah. Or I understand
yeah,
because maybe you don't understand.
and maybe they're in a better place, and that was just not. They're not ready to hear that. Yeah, you just don't know. So take the pressure off yourself right now. Like if you're just like, oh, I just don't know what to say, take that pressure off and just sit with them. I love that about Job's friends. They just sat with him
Mhm.
and you didn't have to say anything. And I remember that day we went over to have dinner with Linda, and I was a little nervous, walking into the home
Mm.
where it was always him and her, um, and just didn't know exactly what to
Mhm.
say. All we did was break bread.
Mhm.
And we did, and we let her talk.
Mhm.
And as she opened up and as she talked, we walked into her conversation.
Mhm.
And it was a beautiful time.
Yeah. We joined her journey. And
Mhm.
that's the big thing is join your friend's journey. 'Cause it is truly a journey.
It is.
Let's let's talk about a couple practical ways a surviving spouse can actually navigate the death of their spouse.
Well, I'm gonna let you kind of take the lead on this one, Monty, because you being in hospice care, I mean, you can really speak to this. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just chime in.
Yeah. It's the grief journey.
Hmm.
That's what we want to talk a little bit about real quick. If you are a surviving spouse, it's important for you to understand that grief is a journey.
Hmm.
So we use that word deliberately in the realm of hospice care and doing a lot of grief support and bereavement education. It is a journey. It is going to be a path that you're going to have to walk down. We say in the grief world, not all days are created equal because there are going to be days where you feel like, hey, I feel pretty good today.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then there are going to be other days where something's going to trigger and you're going to have a very, very difficult day. You will go in a deep, dark
Yeah.
valley. You'll get angry. You'll get mad. You'll be in shock. I mean, you'll go through all of those different phases of grief, and it could
Yeah.
happen in a matter of just
Yeah,
minutes.
and you don't even know when those triggers are gonna happen, right? And Linda shared one with us that she wasn't even expecting, planning on coming to a, celebration of me
You,
turning 50 years old
yeah.
at the recording of this episode, and she was gonna come and join us, and just her I mean, she was getting ready to leave, but just her thinking about coming to the church where her and John did a lot of ministry
Hmm.
at, she just
She just
wasn't
couldn't
able
do
to.
it.
And that was so okay, like as friends, as family, we got to be
Hmm.
okay with the triggers. If you come across in a way where it's like, "Oh, it's been 3 months or it's been a year or it's been 2 years, it's been a week," you have these expectations of where they should be in your mind,
Mm,
and their journey is maybe not in the process like you're thinking they should be.
yeah.
Please don't have those expectations on your family or your loved one, your friends, because you never know what can trigger, and they often don't know
Hmm. Hmm.
what can possibly trigger their heart.
Sure. Yeah.
Conversations, something someone said and didn't have any intention of meaning that, and they take it wrong.
Hmm.
It's like, whoa, that just turn, that just pivot, they need your patience
Yeah.
because they didn't even know
Mhm. Yeah.
most of the time, right?
Yeah. They don't. And that's why you have to give them permission
Mhm.
to lean into the grief. Give them permission
Yeah.
to, "Hey, if you don't feel like coming, it is totally okay. We
Yeah.
totally understand."
And don't
You know, that
internalize
you
it.
yeah.
Yeah, the other person, like, yeah, don't
Yeah, don't
internalize.
take it personal. Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like, don't take that and, like, be like, "Oh," don't do that
Right.
because it's not about you right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, give them that permission to lean into their grief,
Mhm.
and like we said, all days are not created equal, and if they have
Yeah.
a good day, if they can make it and be a part, yay God.
Mhm.
And if they have a tough moment and they just say they just can't make it, okay, we're gonna pray to God for you and to
Mhm.
give you that strength that you need. But
Yeah, still
just remember,
support them.
y'all, it is a journey, and each journey is so different. I'm gonna grieve different than how you would grieve, and your friend is gonna grieve different how you would grieve. And so give your friend permission to grieve the way God designed their body to grieve. And so that's the first important point is lean into
Yeah.
the grief journey.
And Monty, when you see them, right? I mean, if there's gotta be situations where there is, like we talked about earlier, the grieving spirals and it's not going down a good path, really asking God to give you discernment
Mhm.
when to step in and help that person
Yeah,
in those moments, right?
right. Yeah, there's a thing that we call in the grief world complicated grief, and
Mm.
those are those moments of grief where the individual just cannot get past loss, and it is
Yeah.
complicated and it gets difficult. So we're talking like grief that lasts, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 6 years, complicated grief, or like when a parent loses a child and the mom or the dad cannot walk into the child's room for like 6 years. We call that complicated grief, and it's long-standing grief. And there's
Mhm.
a rubric of how we identify someone who is in that realm, but there are those moments in the first few months where maybe the journey of grief is not healthy,
Mhm.
and so as a friend, you get to come alongside and maybe encourage that individual. Hey, have you thought about maybe some grief counseling or
Mhm.
getting involved in a grief group? Because definitely you don't want to give advice
Yeah.
that you're not prepared to give,
No,
but to leave it to the experts, leave it to those who can
for
actually
sure.
help them. So that's where we would suggest building that support system in that person's life. And that support system could look very much like a grief support group.
Yeah. And that's another point, right? Like of moving forward for those that spouse that's left behind is building a support
Build that
system.
support system, yeah. That's
Mhm.
another huge step forward that they can take, and the neat thing about grief groups, Janine, or being a part of a grief counseling group is you're surrounded with other people
Mhm.
who experience your similar journey,
Mm.
and some people are ahead of you on the journey, and some people might be behind you on the journey, but the thing is, you get to be in that environment where people in your journey, they understand your journey, and that's why they call it a support group, because they
Yeah.
support one another and they encourage one another in that system of grief, which can make immeasurable differences in the life of the griever.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But um one of the other things that we wanted to talk about, how a surviving spouse can move forward, is look for new routines, or look for opportunities to experience new routines.
Mhm.
We talked about earlier, life after death can really be a disruptor. It alters life drastically. So
Mhm.
we want to encourage the griever to slowly learn new routines. So it could be simply just like engaging in an activity, a hobby, like taking care of, go buy a new plant and just take care of that plant. Let
Our
that
rose
plant,
bush.
yeah, or a rose bush. That's what we bought Linda. We bought her a rose bush.
Yeah. And I thought it was so sweet. She sent us a picture of the new growth on the rose bush,
Mm,
and it was just symbolic of
yeah,
just new growth in her life. So it was
yeah,
so sweet.
yeah. Another thing that maybe that person can do is when they're ready. Of course, when you're ready,
Mhm.
don't do this like day 3 or week 2. Is pray about considering giving yourself away to some form of volunteer, or ministry. Only
Mhm.
in capacity that you have.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because one of the things that can happen in the grief journey is an individual can fall into what we call this dark valley, this dark tunnel. You talked about the spiraling.
Mhm.
They can spiral so deep into a dark space to where they feel like they cannot move on in life.
Yeah.
And so what we like to do is we like to encourage individuals to go and volunteer, go and do something, go and serve somebody else, because in serving somebody else and doing that activity can actually feed into your purpose once
Yeah, I
again.
could see that for
Yep.
sure because I think about someone mentioned about Jesus on the cross and even in his greatest time of sorrow, grief, pain, all of it, he was still serving,
Yeah.
right? And that's just like being like Jesus even when there's that grief still and just still serving can be
Yeah.
also rewarding.
Mhm.
Have you ever seen Monty in a situation in hospice or friends or family where it wasn't healthy? Like, cause I heard you say that they should take the time and not do it like, right away,
Yeah.
where people have done that to try to replace the void. But I mean, that I'm thinking that can be very healthy as well because you got to take care of you first, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's got to be that physical grieving process before you can start pouring
Sure.
back out. Have you seen a situation or scenario
We
like
said
that?
happen a lot. Yeah, we call it delayed grief. And so
Mm.
what a person will do is they will stuff the grief and they
Mhm.
won't deal with it,
Mhm.
and then they'll go out and try to live their life. What they're doing, they're delaying the grief journey.
Mm.
So 6 months later, they crash, and that grief that they should have experienced that day 1, week 1, week 2 or 3,
And
all of a
shattered.
sudden comes at a point, an opportune time where they're impacted by the grief, and they're, like, saying, "What in the world is going on with me? I thought I was past this." No,
Mm.
what happened is you delayed the grief process, and so
Wow.
that'll come back 6 months or even a year. Sometimes we see people, they'll say, "Man, they're standing so strong. They look so good." You
Mhm.
know, it seems like, man, they're doing a really good job. That kind of scares me when I hear that, because I'm thinking, man, could it
Mm.
be that grief is just being delayed and it'll hit him at a later time in life? And so, in some cases, in a lot of cases, it really does come up, and because it
Yeah,
plays possum.
I see. Yeah, I guess what you're saying in all of this, and with that answering that question is you need to give yourself that time,
Yes, you
right? And
do.
it's okay. And we don't know what how much time that is. Yeah, everybody's different, right? I mean, we can't put a time limit on grief like you mentioned, but making sure you give yourself that time
Yeah.
and that um, opportunity to heal
Hmm.
before pouring back out.
Yeah.
Because the pain will still be there, right? There, the memories will be there.
Yeah.
All those things, making those steps forward,
Yeah.
they're going to be tough. But you want to make sure you're doing that in strength, in God's strength,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
allowing yourself to
Yeah.
heal.
In hospice care, we will prohibit a family member or a loved one from volunteering even in hospice care for 1 year,
Mm,
because we know that it takes about that year journey
interesting.
to walk through grief. And so some hospice um, patients' families will say, "I want to start volunteering," and we'll say, "No, let's have you walk through the first year first, and then after you get
It's
to past that
wise.
first year, because you're going to get through the first anniversaries, the first
Yeah.
birthdays, the first holidays, and we don't want that individual being inundated with a lot of grief during those times in that first year. So we want to give them that opportunity to grieve, to lean into the journey,
Mm-hmm.
at least about a year
Makes sense.
before they can start wanting to serve and do that. Again, that's our rubric, but each person is different, and it could work for some.
Yeah. Sometimes the rubrics just tossed out the window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Boy.
yeah.
Well, this has been a tough topic,
Hmm.
but a necessary one
Yeah,
because life does end
yeah,
at some point
yeah.
for us, and we will face that day
Hmm.
sometime
Sure.
if the Lord
Yeah.
tarries.
And remember, there's hope,
Mhm.
and that's the big word. And I think of the scripture in Psalm 30, verse 5, where it says, "Weeping may endure for the night, but joy." comes in the morning time.
Love that.
And if you hold on in the grief journey and surround yourself with good people and walk through some of these steps we gave you today, I promise you, as you're trusting in God, God
Mhm.
promises you, should I say, that
Yeah.
weeping will endure for the night, but joy will come in the morning. The key is don't get stuck in the night.
Mhm.
Okay. There's hope. You mentioned you can love again.
Yeah.
You can be happy again. You can experience joy again. It's a process. Lean into the journey, but joy will come in the morning as you cooperate with God in the way He designed the human body to
Mhm.
grieve.
Yeah, and we just wanna thank those, spouses who have just been a beautiful example of "Till death do us part,"
Mhm.
because it is something that we hold dear to. People are watching, and they can see that the journey of marriage through that time,
Mhm.
though tough,
Mhm.
though tough, is rewarding in the end. It's like you said,
Yeah.
joy comes in the morning, but you will also receive just a I believe, just a an applause from our Lord and Savior when
Mhm.
you walk through the gates of heaven and he says, "Well done, well done."
Good and faithful servant.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good.
Yep.
As we wrap up today's episode, we want to ask you to do one thing. Please share this episode with somebody that you
Mhm.
know can relate with this topic today. We want to get this message out and help those couples, especially married couples who have navigated down this journey. And so please share it with us. If you haven't had a chance to like or subscribe to any of our podcast platforms, please do that as well. And with that, like always, we pray and we are asking God that you would experience God's favor.
On your forever.
Thanks for listening to The Favorite Marriage, where you and your spouse can experience God's favor on your forever. If you enjoy this resource, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We'll see you next time on the Favorite Marriage Podcast.